Great. Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me and see the first slide here presenting part one, Citizens Climate Lobby? If you would wave in the screen. Can you hear and see me? Excellent. Okay, great. So my name is Alan Hibner, and I retired at the end of 2015 and became a full-time climate activist. And I mean full-time, starting in 2017. For 3 years now, I probably logged close to 7,000 volunteer hours of time every day, 5, 6, 8 hours a day. I joined Citizens Climate Lobby first in February of 2017. I've been with them for 3 years. I'm going to talk about what they do in this first segment. I volunteered a couple of years ago with Pachamama Alliance of the Rochester area. And that led to my working with Project Drawdown through Pachamama Alliance. And that led to me founding the Penfield Community Choice Aggregation Residence Committee. And I'll talk to you about that in my second segment after Sue Hughes Smith fills you in on what CCA is. So in that course that I took for Project Drawdown called Getting into Action, one of the things I learned is there are 4 basic levels of engagement or action. The individual level. Hey, I changed all my LED bulbs in my office, in my home. The family level. My son, my daughter, I've influenced them as the climate dad. They both now have purchased 100% EV vehicles. My son a Tesla, my daughter a Chevy Bolt. So I'm influencing my family. Then comes the most important of all the levels, I think. Community, local action, schools, town boards, municipalities. That's where I think we can have the biggest difference, and I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. And finally, state and national law, policy change, the economic issues of climate change. I'm active at all 4 levels, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of my presentation. So what is Citizens Climate Lobby? This is definitely at level 4. We're up at the national level here, looking at changing policy, passing laws. And it is all about lobbying. The key word about this group is lobbying. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're coming up on 500 chapters in the US, close to 600 worldwide. Most are in the US and Canada. We work locally towards a national solution on climate change, carbon, fee, and dividend. We lobby our members of Congress. I was actively involved in lobbying Congressman Morelli, Senator Schumer, and Senator Gillibrand, their local offices here in Rochester. And finally, we are laser focused. We have a singular goal in mind, put a national price on carbon. I was very gratified to hear Eric talk about pricing carbon at New York State, but that's not going to cut it if one state prices carbon. CCL wants all states to price carbon. CCL's policy or laws will not impact New York. There's provision in the law that I'm going to talk about to allow those states to have their own carbon pricing policy and then to apply this law that we'll talk about at the national level. And then we'll talk about the world level. So we have a really big problem, and I so appreciate all of you coming today because COVID-19 has to be the first thing that you're dealing with. But we have another existential problem so far beyond COVID-19. And I appreciate your coming to listen to that existential problem tonight. So as Eric mentioned, the IPCC in its Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report talked about limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. We have got to do that or come within that range. So we need to reduce emissions. You'll see these numbers again and again. By 2030, we got to be down by 45%. By 2050, 100% in order to stay within these warming guidelines, not to exceed them. We don't have any time to muddle around. We need to get into action today to solve this problem. So we know how to solve it. We absolutely know how to solve it. We have all the technologies, all the things that we need to do. It's simple. if we want less of what you see on this screen, make it more expensive. So in part one, I'm going to talk about how we make this more expensive. Part two, I'll talk about how we use less of this at the community level with community choice aggregation. But for now, let's make it more expensive. Okay, I want to tell you about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. When I sat down, you're seeing this picture right here, in Congressman Morelli's office on April 16th last year, a year ago, I asked him a question, flat out. Congressman Morelli, what if there was a first, best, most effective action step, not the only step, but a first, best, most effective action step that Congress could take right now to begin the process of reversing global warming? Would you take that step? Now, he thought about that. I didn't get an answer in that meeting. I gave him the answer. The answer is right here. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. We gave him all the information we could about this and asked him to think about co-sponsoring it at the national level in Congress. So are you guys ready for a big, beautiful, bipartisan solution to climate change? In the fall of 2018, November 2018, the House of Representatives released the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. This was the very first time that a bipartisan climate bill, I'm serious, had been released in 10 years since the Waxman-Markey Act in 2008. On top of that, one of the original co-sponsors, a lead co-sponsor, was a Republican, Francis Rooney from Florida. His co-sponsor, original sponsor, was Ted Deutsch from Florida. There's a reason for that. Think about Florida and the problems that it has. Okay. In December, the Senate released a companion bill to this. Now, this is the end of the 115th Congress, so it had to turn right around and be reintroduced in the 116th Congress in January of 2019, and it was. And oh, by the way, it still hasn't passed. It's going to have to be released again, but that's another story. So how does this bill actually work? First, it puts a steadily rising fee on carbon, starting at $15 per ton of CO2 and equivalent greenhouse gas emissions, rising $10 per ton annually. It gives back all of the net revenues from the fee to households as monthly dividend checks to help them offset rising energy prices due to burning fossil fuels. There's a couple other provisions to make this policy really work in today's political environment. Imported fossil fuels and fossil fuel intensive goods are subject to the same carbon fee at the border. Prorated rebates of the fees already paid by U.S. exporters of fossil fuels are provided when exporting to countries that already have similar or equivalent carbon pricing in effect. There will be a narrow regulatory pause on only the greenhouse effect of CO2 and equivalent greenhouse gas emissions for 10 years. This avoids doubling up on penalties. It gives the policy a chance to meet ambitious targets, and it provides predictability to businesses so they can plan change. If the targets aren't met, this legislation makes sure those regulations snap back in full force after the evaluation. Overall, this bill will drive down America's carbon pollution and bring climate change under control while absolutely unleashing American technology, innovation, and ingenuity. If we do nothing, if we stay static, in the next 30 years, by 2050, it's projected, and you saw some numbers from Eric earlier, projected with business as usual, we will reduce our emissions perhaps 1%. If we factor in the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, we will reduce emissions by 40% in 12 years and by 90%. Now, this is in the United States only. So yeah, ask me, what about the rest of the world? The US is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. If we start advocating for border adjustments and carbon dividends, and we start slapping fees on imports of oil and gas, the rest of the world will take notice. In fact, we're behind much of the rest of the world in applying a national price on carbon. And if you look at what this bill does, if it starts to take effect, compare it to those targets, a 1.5 optimum target and 2.0 degrees Celsius. Just this bill alone will help us bend that curve, flatten that curve, and bring it down to where we need to be. It is the first, most effective piece of national legislation that Congress can pass. So, benefits, very quickly, let's recap them. 40% reduction by 2030. Supported by economists and scientists, is simple, comprehensive, effective. Families get paid. Look, 10 years, family of 4, my son, Justin, his wife, my 2 granddaughters. 10 years in, $4,400 a year. It's a dividend check coming out monthly. Okay, it's in the people's pockets. They spend it any way they want. And no, we're going to talk about how it changes consumer behavior, Chris. We will. What about healthy environment? Hey, you know what's happening right now with COVID-19. The amazing reductions in pollution. I don't have to convince you about asthma and other ozone and other types of lung diseases being created by fossil fuel burning. We could save up to 300,000 lives by 2030. Take a look at this picture. March, April of 2019, New Delhi, India. March, April 2020, New Delhi, India. Do you see the difference? That is shocking. That just took me and shook me. That's the world I want to live in. That's the world I want to create with the work that I'm doing. This bill will create $70 to $80 million of revenue. And yeah, I know Democrats want to get their hands on it and spend it. Fine. Republicans don't want to tax. Okay, so we've got to come to a compromise. This will create 2.1 million jobs, not just technology jobs, not just wind and solar, all kinds of jobs. Most of the money will go into the pockets of people who are low and middle income. Right now, the costs of environmental destruction are not being paid for. The externalized costs, they're just not being paid for. This is a bipartisan bill. New York is lucky. We have all 3 aspects of our government in Democratic hands. But if we don't pass a national law that is bipartisan, what will happen? Basically, it'll be turned right around and chipped away at by the next administration of the other party. We have got to have a national bipartisan price on carbon. And the majority of Republicans actually do support pricing carbon, do support working on climate change. Finally, to help our Republican friends actually adopt this policy, it's revenue neutral. There's no tax revenues that are generated. Every dollar of net revenue is returned to Americans as equal shares. And it most benefits our lowest income people. In New York 25, in the congressional district, about 92% of our lowest quintile income families will come out ahead or break even with the payments that they're receiving, as opposed to the higher energy costs from a rising price on fossil fuels. So have we made any progress? Absolutely. CCL has gotten endorsements of this bill from 40% of the congressional district, including Penfield. I got that one. CCL has gotten endorsements for carbon fee and dividend, the policy, in the prior 2 years from 57% of our congressional district. Again, Penfield, I got that one. But most importantly, on July 17th, Congressman Morelli, after thinking about our questions and our presentation, decided to co-sponsor the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. He made the decision to co-sponsor. We currently have 80 members of the House of Representatives co-sponsoring this bill. There's 7 carbon bills in Congress. This is the big dog. This is the one that has more co-sponsorships, more support than any other carbon pricing bill. This is the one you should get behind. This is a picture of mine, and there's a certain person in here that I'll be introducing in just a minute who's been instrumental in my climate career. Sue Hughes Smith is on the bottom row on the right. Thank you, Sue. 2 of her sons are in the back row, Benny and Liam. I wouldn't be where I am today without the support and assistance of Sue Hughes Smith and her family. So thank you, Sue. This was a shining moment in my career. I was invited to speak on behalf of CCL at this press conference. Congressman Morelli, on August 14th last year, announced his climate emergency resolution, and he made the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act the centerpiece, the #1 piece of legislation, the first one of 8 that he is co-sponsoring in Congress. So what happens next? After the election in January, this bill needs to be reintroduced in the 117th Congress. A companion bill must be reintroduced. It's going to have to move through committee. There'll have to be a conference agreement between the Senate and the House, and then it goes for signature. I am amazingly optimistic that this can pass in 2021, depending upon how this election goes. So I have to keep my optimism about how we can get this bill passed in 2021. We don't have time to waste. So everybody, what's not to like about this bill? Underneath the thumbnails, you have a little icon called Reactions. If you want this bill to pass, go to Reactions and select the thumbs up indicator. I want to see a bunch of thumbs up. Come on, get those thumbs up there. Let's see them. All right. Excellent. Okay, fantastic, folks. I see a lot of thumbs up there. I'm going to give you some hope. So I'm going to leave it here, take some questions. If you have any questions, citizensclimatelobby.org. Email me, call me. I'd love to get you engaged with lobbying for this bill. It's an amazing process. Thank you.